Welcome back to my series, United Countries. In today's episode we'll talk about Scandinavia. Scandinavia is the region at the north of Europe and northwest of Russia. It's made out of some of the wealthiest countries in the world. Scandinavia is the term often used to refer to Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. Of course, some people also include Iceland and Finland as part of Scandinavia, but they are not. Iceland and Finland are Nordic countries, just like the other three, but these two have a big cultural and linguistic difference, and they're too different to live under the same nation. Sweden, Norway and Denmark are much closer culturally, and people have always suggested an union between these three, for them to become even stronger. Like always, we'll start with size. In terms of size and land, Scandinavia would be absolutely huge. Covering 878,431 square kilometers, Scandinavia would be bigger than Turkey, Chile, Germany, Spain and France. The Nordic country would become the 34th largest country by size, also ahead of Namibia, but just a bit smaller than Pakistan. Overall, Scandinavia would be the second largest country in Europe, just behind Russia. Now on to population. Scandinavia would have a small population for its huge size, as the Nordic nation would only count with 21,367,800 people inside its borders. Scandinavia would still have a high population, as it would be the 58th country with the largest population in the world, ahead of Burkina Faso, but behind Sri Lanka. Almost 50%, or half of Scandinavia's population would come from Sweden. Now on to its GDP. Scandinavia would have an enormous GDP, especially for a relatively small population. The new formed nation would count with over $1,336 billion. That would instantly put the Nordic nation into the 15th position worldwide, ahead of Mexico, the Netherlands and Saudi Arabia, but behind Australia. This is a reason why this new country would be so wealthy. Scandinavia would also be the 7th largest country in Europe. GDP per capita. Scandinavia is incredibly wealthy, and the average GDP per capita inside the new Nordic country would be $65,420. That's absolutely huge. And one of the biggest in the world. In fact, Scandinavia would have the world's 6th highest GDP per capita, ahead of Singapore, Germany, and even the United States of America. However, Qatar would still have a higher GDP per capita. Norway is already one of the wealthiest nations in the world, as they already count with over $80,000 per capita. Scandinavia would have the 4th largest GDP per capita in Europe. Scandinavia would also be one of the safest countries in the world, as the nation would only count with a crime rate of 0.85. This would put them into the 189th position worldwide. In this case, the lower positions are better. Sweden would be safer than the United Arab Emirates, but still a bit more dangerous than Taiwan. Inside Scandinavia, Sweden would have the highest crime rate. The suicide rate would be significantly higher than the crime rate, as Scandinavia would have a suicide rate of 10.3. Taking the 73rd position, Scandinavia would have more suicides than Cuba, Sudan, Mali and Niger. However, Luxembourg would still have a higher number. Now comes the most controversial part, picking a capital. To pick a capital, we'll need to see the largest cities inside Scandinavia. Stockholm, or Sweden's capital, would be largest city, with over 1.2 million people living inside it. Copenhagen, Denmark's capital, would follow with a very similar number, and would take the silver medal. Oslo, or Norway's capital, would have a significantly lower number, with only over 500,000 people. Göteborg would take the 4th position, with over 500,000 too, and Malmö would follow, with over 265,000 people. Aarhus, from Denmark, is next, with 240,000, and Bergen finishes the list, with over 200,000. As Stockholm is the largest city in both size and population, and it's already the capital of Sweden and one of the most important in Europe, it would make sense to make it the capital of this new country. Of course, Copenhagen is still a very large city, but I don't think it's big enough to become the capital. Now we move on to religion. Any type of Christianity would be followed by over 72% of the population, or almost 3 out of 4 people. Another quarter, or 25%, would be made up of atheists and non-religious people. The remaining 3% would follow a variety of other religions, such as Islam, Buddhism, and humanism. This would make Scandinavia one of the most non-religious countries in Europe and the world. Language. The most spoken languages in Scandinavia would be Swedish, with over 48% of the population speaking it as a first language, or almost 2 out of 4 people. Danish, with over a quarter, or 27% of the total population speaking it as their native language. And Norwegian, with an exact quarter, or 25%. English would be understood by most people, as many Scandinavians use it as their second language. Military personnel. Scandinavia's personnel would be relatively high, counting with over 69,800 active duty soldiers, 84,290 reserve soldiers, and over 21,950 soldiers in the paramilitary. This makes a total of 176,040 soldiers, which is quite high for an European nation. Military budget. Scandinavia would have a high personnel, and that personnel would be accompanied with a high budget. The Nordic nation would count with over $16 billion into its military budget, which is one of the highest numbers in the world. The total military would be moderate, as Scandinavia would have a lot of soldiers with a high budget, and a decent navy. Scandinavia would have a lot of weapons and war vehicles too, but the nation wouldn't be invincible, and unless it has strong allies in the war, Scandinavia wouldn't be the strongest. For now, this is how Scandinavia would look like, if it became a country. It would be incredibly wealthy, and full of resources. The Nordic nation would most likely become a world superpower. However, this is just counting Denmark, Norway and Sweden. I was curious to also see how would Scandinavia look like, if we added Finland. I know I said Finland is too culturally different from the other countries, but just for curiosity, and the fun of it, we'll add Finland. Let's look at size again, but this time including Finland. Scandinavia's size would increase to up to 1,216,855 square kilometers, finally surpassing the 1 million square kilometers. Scandinavia would now be larger than Colombia, but still smaller than South Africa. Scandinavia would still be the second biggest country by size in Europe, still behind Russia. The GDP of Scandinavia would increase to $1,611 billion if we added Finland. While the GDP per capita would significantly decrease to $61,526 per capita. This would decrease, as Finland has a much smaller GDP per capita than Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Now on to the military personnel. The military would change drastically if we added Finland, as Scandinavia would now count with 103,290 active soldiers, over 1,211,790 soldiers in the reserves, and a paramilitary of 24,650. The total military personnel would now sit at over 1,339,730. That's right, Finland would add more than 1 million soldiers to Scandinavia, which is quite a lot, as it's more than what Scandinavia already had without Finland. Finally, we'll look at Scandinavia's military budget with Finland. The military budget wouldn't drastically change, as it would only increase to $20 billion. Scandinavia would, however, now become the 15th country with the largest military budget, ahead of Turkey, but behind Canada. The total military of Scandinavia would now be strong, as Scandinavia with Finland will have an enormous military personnel, of over 1 million soldiers, accompanied with a really high budget, and a whole lot of war vehicles and weapons. Finally, we've finished with Scandinavia. With or without Finland, it's undoubtable that the Nordic nation would be a superpower, and one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest country in the world. I would love to see this union, and it would benefit everyone inside these countries. Sweden, Denmark and Norway have really similar languages, governments, cultures and people, so it wouldn't be too unlikely to see this union form. If Scandinavia joined the European Union, the new country would only get bigger and stronger. This has been it for today, and in the next episode, we'll leave Europe and talk about a possible union in a different continent. Peace.